Alert, alert, breaking news. Is it still breaking news when it's 8 hours old? Trump is finally taking action against the lawless cities, including Seattle. Let's take a look. The news says, here's Trump's tweet: "My administration will do everything in its power to prevent weak mayors," Jenny Durkin, "and lawless cities from taking federal dollars while they let anarchists harm people, burn buildings, and ruin lives and businesses. We're putting them on notice today." I like it. The federal feud between Trump and liberal cities, which encourage protests seeking to defund the police, escalated sharply on Wednesday when the president ordered the federal government to begin the process of defunding New York City, Portland, Seattle, and Washington, D.C., cities where officials allowed lawless protests and cut police budgets amid rising violent crime. Bravo, good sir. I have to say, I commend the president. I mean, defund the police. He's going to defund these cities. In a five-page memo sent to federal agencies on Wednesday, whose subject is reviewing funding to state and local government recipients of federal funds that are permitting anarchy, violence, and destruction in American cities, and signed by Trump, the president orders them to report to the White House Office of Management and Budget on any funding that could be redirected. New York City, Portland, Seattle, and even Washington, D.C. are among the initial targets of the measure. "My administration will not allow federal tax dollars to fund cities that allow themselves to deteriorate into lawless zones," Trump said in the memo, which mentions New York Mayor Bill de Blasio by name twice, "to ensure the federal funding is not wasted or spent in a manner that directly violates our government's promise to protect life, liberty, and property. It is imperative that the federal government review the use of federal funds by jurisdictions that permit anarchy, violence, and destruction in America's cities." In a tweet late on Wednesday, Trump followed up the memo by saying that his administration will do everything in its power to prevent weak mayors and lawless cities from taking federal dollars while they let anarchists harm people, burn buildings, and ruin lives and businesses. "We're putting them on notice today." Isn't it great? Bravo, good sir. I have to say, amid all the scandals that are going on here in Washington State, where Jay Inslee has allowed billions of dollars of unemployment funds to be sent to Nigerian fraudsters, he hasn't held anybody accountable. He hasn't fired anybody that I know of regarding this scheme. He hasn't held anybody accountable. And he's now setting aside $40 million for illegal immigrants that are in our sanctuary state, while legal Washingtonians, are still suffering. This is unacceptable, and I, for one, support what President Trump is doing here. Here's the full story on the New York Post. It goes into a little more detail, but the best part is that Governor Cuomo of New York has been totally triggered by this. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo on Wednesday all but threatened President Trump's safety if he returns to New York City in a rant responding to an exclusive story by the Post that Trump is looking to pull federal funding from lawless cities, including New York. Now, what's particularly horrific about this is that Cuomo goes on to say that Trump better basically watch his back if he ever shows up in New York again. And this is terrifying in the time where we have a Trump supporter shot in the back in Portland in retaliation for the shootings and the other things that have happened supposedly, or whatever it is, whatever you want to call the justification. There is none. It doesn't exist. I mean, I've never had a fear for my own life or a fear for the life of my own family like we have right now, where now I think, okay, am I safe to take my kid to the next rally after everything that's going on? I really have to question that. You know, we had the Chaz zone go down here in Seattle. We made national headlines. there was all kinds of fake news around it, specifically with CNN, and claiming that there was no lawlessness going on, no violence, no destruction, no graffiti. It was more of the Jenny Durkin block party that she claimed was happening instead of the truth. And we saw CNN going out and saying, "Oh, you don't trust what's going on. Don't trust the news. There's no armed guards. It's just fake." When in reality, I drove down to the Chaz and got a good look for myself when I saw that crap going on the news, because I wanted to see. I wanted to take a look. And what I saw was terrifying. I was chased and pursued for over 14 blocks by a group of Antifa thugs in a Jeep with no license plates. They chased me down, and after several intimidating stare downs, I finally left the area, because they didn't want somebody there, I guess, filming the barricades blocking the Chaz. And I got up close and personal video of the armed guards that CNN said didn't exist. They tried to play it all down. I've got several clips here that I can play.
Let's go over some facts versus fears about a demonstration in Seattle. You've probably heard about this so-called Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, abbreviated to CHAZ. Seattle police boarded up and left a precinct in a move to de-escalate tensions amid protests in the city. And now this zone is a bit like an Occupy Wall Street encampment, mostly in a park and in a few nearby city blocks. The Seattle Times calls it an experiment in alternative community. Peaceful, pretty much kind of self-organizing. But if you've been watching Fox News, they are talking about it like it's a lawless state, very troubling and dangerous. Some guests even likening it to Mogadishu. And this is not just happening on the opinion side, it's happening on the news side as well. Watch how it was presented on Friday on Brett Baer's special report.
A large section of Seattle remains occupied territory, with protesters taking over a police precinct and establishing what they call an autonomous zone. President Trump has labeled the demonstrators anarchists and terrorists and threatens to intervene.
Wait, you can't just quote the president lying about American citizens, calling them terrorists, and then just move on. The president's tweets were heinous on this subject, using the T word, terrorists. It's just really troubling to see it treated like it's real and serious and important on a newscast. Now, to be clear, this is not like the city of Seattle's been taken over. Look at this map. Okay, it looks like a big deal here when you zoom way in to Pine Street and the surrounding area, but let's zoom out and show all of Seattle, and you get a sense of the context for this. This is really just happening in about 6 city blocks. That's not to say that there aren't crimes happening. It's not to say there aren't problems and troubles, but you've got to have perspective. Now, there's something else that Fox News did that is getting a lot of attention in Seattle for its coverage. It took this photo, that's a real photo, and then cropped out the guy with the gun, moved him over into a photo of a vandalized store. So made it look like this situation in this autonomous zone is lawless and dangerous, and there's broken glass, and there's vandalism, and there's armed guards. That is a complete distortion. But it was up there on the website until the Seattle Times noticed it and called it out. This was also noticed by Seattleites. Fox's homepage on Thursday used an image from St. Paul, Minnesota, showing a fire in St. Paul, and then put that on top of a photo, on top of a story about Seattle and about this Chaz zone in Seattle. So that's completely misleading, and Fox had to cop to it when the Seattle Times called. Look, I think the point here is, when you're hearing about this from national news sources, and you get a sense that they're trying to stoke fear and division, seek out local sources instead. I mean, Fox News has a reporter in Seattle. They should use him more often on the air. It's best to go to the ground truth, to reporters who are there, who are living the story, outlets like the Seattle Times, and find out what's really going on, because otherwise there's a lot of fear-mongering going on when it comes to a story like this.
Yeah, only believe the Seattle Times. Definitely don't believe the fake Fox News, according to Brian Stelter. Only reputable sources, like the Seattle Times, and those that align ideologically with Brian Stelter. Those are the only real news sources that we should believe when it comes to Seattle and what's happening. The city allowed this to happen. They allowed this to continue For weeks, we allowed the trash to pile up, and then the city would come and take it out. We allowed the lights to stay on, and taxpayers picked up the tab. We allowed businesses to be damaged and destroyed, and now those businesses are suing the city. Just a peaceful block party, Jenny Durkin. Isn't that right? You see, I went down there after seeing all of the local news, all of the national news and the local news saying that the photoshopped gunmen and the armed guards didn't exist. They don't exist, do they? This was right out front of the Chaz. That's the same guy. That's the same guy that Brian Stelter said didn't exist. That was photoshopped. And maybe Fox News did. Maybe they did Photoshop the guy out, move around pictures. They used a flaming picture from another city and used it in Seattle. Well, there was a dozen police cars torched, or at least six police cars. Maybe one's enough, right? Torched and totally burned to the ground in downtown Seattle. And here's the guy. There he is. That's the guy right there. And he waved at me. That place was dangerous, and it should have been shut down long before somebody died. This is why I support what President Trump is doing here. What happened in the Chop and Chaz zone will come to a neighborhood near me and near you if we keep voting the way that we've been voting here in Washington State. This is why I stepped up to run. This is why I got involved politically during the shutdown, the unconstitutional shutdown from Jay Inslee. We can see here, as a result of the Chop Chaz, the place that was definitely not a lawless zone, definitely not full of armed guards in unmarked vehicles, roaming around, killing people. Dad of Seattle Chop shooting victim files a $3 billion in claims against the government. Unfortunately, we just sent over $1 billion to Nigerian fraudsters, as I mentioned earlier, and as everybody knows, we've all seen the terrible news about that, and we all know that Jay Inslee has yet to hold anybody accountable. And yet here is the father of a 19-year-old man who was fatally shot inside Seattle's Capitol Hill occupied protest zone in June has filed $3 billion claims against local and state governments for allegedly allowing an atmosphere of lawlessness that resulted in his son's death. Yeah. I just want to see justice for my son, Horace told the Post, noting that no arrests have been made yet for the killing. Somebody has to be held responsible. Something is not right, and my son should still be alive to this day. Lorenzo was shot multiple times and laid bleeding to death in the Seattle streets with no one to respond. Alleged papers filed by Horace's separate $1 billion claims against the city, King County, and state of Washington, confusion and blockades, as we just saw, led to a 20-minute delay before the first responders finally arrived on the scene. Before this happened, there was a dumpster fire that the Chaz PD, had blocked the fire department from coming in. There were several other instances before that, and they allowed it to continue. And Jay Inslee pretended like he didn't even know that this was going on. He didn't have help. He needed help. He needed me, and I wasn't there for him. I can only imagine this father's pain. As a father myself, I have a 12-year-old son that I care about deeply. He's come to several rallies with me. He's been my cameraman at several events, and And now after you see the escalation here, you see the people that have died in the CHOPS zone. It took multiple deaths there before, or multiple shootings, and the death of this boy before the officials in Seattle shut that place down, before they took action. We have all these issues that Jay Inslee has failed to hold anybody accountable on. He's allocating funds for illegal immigrants instead of legal Washingtonians. He's paying for more and more government employees in the form of contact tracers. He's not having anybody trace anybody's unemployment claims. We don't have any claims tracers. And people are still suffering. Let's not even talk about the CDC numbers that have come out and have cast shade onto all of the previous predictions, all of the previous numbers for COVID. But yet Jay Inslee's steaming right ahead with the shutdowns and the measures and stay-home orders, canceled school, and as a result, we have devastated our state economy. The Progressive Voter Guide says that I'm not open to new revenue sources because they are trying to push an income tax in Washington now as a result of the COVID shutdown and the budget shortfalls that have resulted from it. And now to pay for all of the unemployment claims and all of the budget shortfalls, they want to institute an income tax and further tax Washingtonians that are struggling. We have a clear source of new income, a clear source of new revenue, and that's to reopen our state and get out of the way so that we can have new business. We have this headline from Cairo 7, more than 100 Seattle businesses closed for good. But yet it says here, if you read just a little bit, about 1,300 businesses have closed throughout the region, including more than 100 in Seattle. There's your source of revenue. There's your budget shortfall. If we reopen our economy and get everybody back to work, while at the same time taking care of those most vulnerable among us, taking care of the sick, taking care of the old and elderly people that we love, we can still keep doing that. We can isolate the people who have comorbidities, that have other issues, that are sick, and people who are just paranoid, people who are just worried about maybe infecting a loved one or whatever. They can also, you think about the school situation, the problems with our school system right now. We don't need our kids trying to figure this thing out in isolation, in bedrooms. In some places, some houses don't even have, not to mention the nutritional value of losing your dedicated meals for some of the poorest kids that are affected by this. But kids that don't have any sufficient technology, and I know there's resources for that are going around, but also people forget that the internet connection is terrible for a lot of people that don't pay for a premium service. And when you have all of a sudden this big strain on people's home internet connections while someone else in the house is trying to watch Netflix, it causes a big problem. If we reopen our schools and get 90% of the students back into class, and the people that are weak or ill or that are at risk, they can stay home. They can test out the online programs that we have, and everybody else can go back to school. Teachers that are older can focus on the online programs, and teachers that are younger and healthy and that aren't at risk for COVID-19, those are the teachers that go back to class. And if teachers don't want to go back and teach, if this becomes a situation where it's a debate, because this is all becoming more political than pandemic, and if it's going to be a situation where people don't want to go back and teach, then we need to seriously look at, no matter what happens, we need to look at this. But if that's the case, then we need to look at taking that funding and allowing for school choice for the school voucher program, so I can take that money that's already being spent on my child and take that and apply it to another school, a private school or a private institution, or some sort of co-learning homeschool program, whatever that is. But I should have the freedom to be able to take that money that's being allocated for my child and apply that to a school that is going to do the things that I think are most important. Not to mention the most important curriculum and values, which is a whole separate stream altogether with the craziness that's happening. My wife just did a live stream about some of the crazy Black Lives Matter curriculum things that are coming down the pike, and that are actually already being taught at our schools. It's totally outrageous. But getting back to this topic, this is how we address our budget shortfall. This is how we get Washingtonians back to work. This is how we get things fixed in our state. We need to reopen our economy. We need to reopen Washington. That's why I got involved in the first place. We need to get people back to work. We need to have unemployment claims tracers. We don't need contact tracers. Obviously, Jay Inslee has alternate motives, or ulterior motives, alternate agenda, whatever you want to say, regarding this whole shutdown. He lied to us from the beginning. This 2-week shutdown, 2 weeks to slow the spread, turned into months on end. We all know it, and now it's time to end it. We need to reopen Washington. Please support my campaign. Please like this page. If you just like the page, it helps the algorithm on Facebook. If you share a video or share something on your page or just post a comment, it helps as well. But just liking the page, going to the page and clicking the like button really does help. And it increases the exposure. It gets more people aware of the issues and aware of my campaign. And we need to flip Washington red. We need to send change to Olympia. We need to send some common sense people to Olympia that can actually look at things objectively and look for some real solutions. And that's what I want to do. I want to look at individual problems and look at the best solutions. This isn't a party issue. This is these shouldn't be party problems, but they've turned it into one. The one party is supporting all this lawlessness, and one party is supporting growth and opportunity in Washington state. And that's the Republican Party. That's why I stepped up to run, because we need to reopen Washington. Please go to my website, adam4wa.com, adam4wa.com. You can find me on social media. Please like my page, like I said, and interact with the video. If there's something you think I should talk about, or if I'm missing the ball here, if I'm wrong, let me know, please. And thanks for watching.